Hey, I'm Apxvoid and welcome to my giant Cyclone Mage guide. I know I haven't posted on YouTube yet, but I will be uploading Hearthstone content going forward, so make sure to subscribe if you like the video. I will post a written version of the guide in the description, which is pretty much the script to this video if you would rather read than watch, but I'll try to include some cool clips and whatever. I will be doing the editing myself, so I apologize for any sloppiness there. And this guide is probably going to be kind of long, so I'll break it down into 3 sections: deck overview, strategy, matchup guide and mulligans, and then card analysis and budget replacements. Deck overview strategy. First, I'll do a brief rundown through the deck and explain a little bit how it works. If you have played or watched this deck before, then some of this information might be a bit redundant for you. So, Giant Cyclone Mage is pretty unique, and it's one of the harder decks to play optimally right now. I don't see this as a bad thing though, I just think it makes the deck more rewarding to do well with. The win condition of this deck revolves around 2 major combos. There's the spell combo, which is Mana Cyclone and cheap spells, and then there's the Giant combo, which is Giant plus Conjurer's Calling on the Giant. Usually Mountain Giant, since that way you get either an 8/8, another Giant, or a 7/8 Taunt Grave Whore, and those are really strong against aggro, because those are the only 2 12 mana cards in the game. So you have a 75% chance to get a taunt if you Conjurer's Calling on an 8/8 Giant. Ideally you pull off both of these combos in your games, but usually, well, sometimes you only need one of these lines of play to win. Sometimes you can pull off the spell combo early on and then follow up with the Giant Conjurer combo afterwards. It's not always worth it though. It can be better to save your spells and go for the Giant combo first and use spells for more utility. Generally, the Giant combo is higher priority than the spell combo. To perform these combos effectively, you usually have to save up a lot of cards from early game, well, for hand size and Cyclone spells, so try to resist the urge to play certain cards for little to no value. For example, using Mirror Image or Ray of Frost to stop a little bit of early damage without using Mana Cyclone is usually not good. You can do it when you're stopping like an 8/8 Cleave, but on a 3/3 just take the damage and save the spells. And then the rest of the card choices in the deck are mostly just to fill up the turns where you can't perform these combos, so card draw like Sandbinder, taunts like Ziliax, and we got utility cards like Ooze, but these spots are pretty flexible a lot of the time. Early game, turns 1 to 3. This deck usually has slow early game, so don't expect to be aggressive like some of the old Mage builds in previous expansions. Turns 1 to 2 usually is pass or ping, and if it's not a class like Rogue, then Ooze is usually fine to play early on, unless you plan to pass into turn 4 Giant on the coin, in which case you want to keep your hand size as high as possible so that you can play the Giant on turn 4. Sorcerer's Apprentice is not always played on turn 2, in fact, it's probably more often not played than played. If you have a spell heavy hand, you should probably save it. Or if you have 2 Sorcerer's Apprentices in hand, you can usually play one. Or if it's a high weapon removal like Rogue or Warrior that's just gonna kill your Sorcerer's Apprentice with a backstab or something, it's really not worth, or a weapon project. Early apprentices can be very, very strong though. Matchups with less early game removal like Priest, Mage, or sometimes Hunter. Turn 3 is oftentimes a ping pass as well, but ideally you play Arcane Intellect or Luna. This deck is all about its power play, so you really need to get used to playing slow to set these power plays up as best as possible, and just acquiring value in your hand, basically. Also, yeah, keeping your hand size as big as possible, like I said, is good as well. Sometimes you'll play Sorcerer's Apprentice early, but it's completely dependent on the texture of your hand. Here's an example of a hand where I'll ping pass on both turn 2 and 3, so I can play the Giant on turn 4. It's pretty straightforward, I think. Mid-game, turn 4 to 7. This is where we want to start pulling off these aforementioned combos. The earlier we can Giant plus Conjurers, the better, so it's all about setting these turns up. I'm sure you've seen it before. Sometimes you can hold off on the Mana Cyclone so that you can find more spells, and also if your opponent has little to no board, it's good to wait until they have something on board to use your spells more efficiently. Here is an example of a common play where you can save Mountain Giant to play around removal and guarantee the Giant, Coin, Conjurer's Calling next turn. Guaranteeing 2 giants can often snowball the board in your favor because usually they can deal with 1 giant, but usually the second one lives, and then you can attack and Conjure's Calling again with the second charge of the twin spell, and that's usually too much for most decks to deal with, especially if you have something like Khadgar to make it even better. This doesn't always happen on turn 4 or 5 though. It's also relevant going into turn 6 or 7, or really any time you can guarantee giant Conjure's Calling. So yeah, you kind of just build up hand size to do those turns. Elemental Evocation helps a little bit because it makes the giant cost 1 less. And so does the coin. But you still need to know when to play giant without Conjure's Calling, since a lot of the time you still will just have to play 8/8 giants. Mid-game, turn 4 to 7. This is where we want to start pulling off the combos. The earlier we can giant Conjure's Calling, the better. So it's all about setting these turns up. Sometimes you can hold off on the mana Cyclone so that you can just wait until you find more spells, and this is usually good if your opponent has no board and you don't really have good Ray of Frost targets, and you'll just want to wait till they develop a little bit more. You can also sometimes hold off on playing a turn 4 or 5 giant as well to guarantee the Conjure's Calling. Here is an example of saving the giant to play giant, coin, Conjure's Calling next turn, guaranteeing 2 giants in 1 turn. This can often snowball your board in your favor because they can usually deal with 1 giant, but if the second one lives, then you can attack and Conjure's Calling again, and then they have to deal with 2 giants again, and that's pretty tough for most decks to deal with. This doesn't always happen on turn 4 or 5. It's also relevant going into turn 6 or 7 since you don't always have a big hand size. And it's a pretty common turn 7 to do giant plus Conjure's Calling. This is usually when you're going first and don't have the luxury of having the coin for the extra hand size. But however, you do still need to know when to play the giant without Conjure's Calling, since sometimes you just don't have the hand size to guarantee a Conjure's Calling on giant. This is also pretty matchup dependent since some decks have better removal for giants than others, like maybe a warrior with 8 armor, for example. You don't really want to play into the shield slam. But there are situations where baiting removal is good. This is usually against the decks with less removal. Like having a rogue put in 8 damage is sometimes nice, especially when you don't have the Conjure's Calling. You will often play giants when you don't have the calling because people will usually respect the giants and kill them, and that can work out in your favor. Kind of like an 8/8 taunt, a little bit. And then another mid-game play that you really have to look out for is Conjure's Calling on non-giant minions. This doesn't happen too often, but in a lot of matchups where you are desperate for board, like aggro matchups mostly against decks with little to no AoE, this can be very important. So for example, Conjure's Calling a Sandbinder can just be what you need to get board versus rogue early on, or maybe something like Ziliax sometimes. And Khadgar can make these a lot better too, these like turn 4 Conjure Callings, or turn 5. And then there's the late game, turn 8+. So late game with this deck is pretty similar to mid game, except now you have mana to do everything pretty much. Hopefully you still have lots of resources, so you can still keep on doing giant Conjure's Callings and all that. Maybe cycle some cards if you're out of Conjure's Calling. And then Anton comes into play now, so always look out for the Antonitis turns, but don't be too greedy with them. Sometimes you can even just play Anton as a 5/7 if you have a board and people just won't be able to deal with it. But yeah, you only really want to be greedy with the Anton against Control Warrior. By being greedy, I mean going for like the full Anton Sorcerer's Apprentice, 5 or 6 fireballs, because against most classes that's unnecessary, but Warrior, it's really helpful. You can get like 7 fireballs though, it's pretty crazy. But sometimes you just need 1, 2, or even 0, like I said. Matchup and Mulligan Guide. In this section, I'm going to talk about the 2 most important things to learn, the matchups and the mulligan. I believe knowing your matchups well is one of the most important things that you can learn in competitive HS with any deck. Knowing what removal your opponent's deck runs can be crucial. I'll write a mini mulligan guide for each matchup, giving you an idea of what cards you want to keep. But this will only give you an idea, it won't be perfect because I can't go into all the synergy mulligans, which is sort of the hard part. So for example, cards like Ray of Frost, Magic Trick, Sork's Apprentice are a lot better if you have Mana Cyclone in your hand. I'm only going to include matchups for the most common ladder decks at the time of writing this guide. So I wrote down some general Mulligan tips. Hopefully they help a little bit. They won't be too useful, but... So this is kind of obvious. Keep Elemental Evocation if you also have the option to keep Mana Cyclones. Same logic with cards like Ray of Frost or Mirror Image, but these cards are a bit more relevant against classes like Rogue, Hunter, will just aggro, whereas the Evocation might be better versus Warrior, or just Control. Sandbinder is pretty much always a keep going first, since you don't really have anything to do on turn 4 without the coin, because you can't just pass into a giant, so you really need that 4, and then oftentimes if you Sandbinder on 4, you can giant on 5 or follow up with the Cyclone turn, and it really shows off how good Sandbinder can be in the deck when you do those. Arcane Intellect is pretty much always a keep in every matchup. The only situation where I don't keep it is if I had to, pretty much. Probably like 99% keep. This might come as a surprise to some people. It's just that you have nothing, same logic to Sandbinder, you have nothing to do on turn 3, so this sort of just acquires value, sets up the combos a little bit. So you do want that AI on turn 3, since really the only other things you could do is play other spells, which are usually not as good. Especially going first. AI is especially good going first, just like Sandbinder is. In general, this one's also a little bit obvious. Keeping Mountain Giant is a lot better on coin, since you can always pass early on into a turn 4 Giant, or even Giant Coin Conjures Calling on turn 5 or 6, like we talked about before. And then Mountain Giant's always a better keep with AI or Conjures Calling, so if I'm going first and have an Arcane Intellect, I'll consider keeping the Giant, but it's pretty rare that I keep a Mountain Giant going first. A lot of people think, oh, just auto-keep Mountain Giant Conjures Calling, but that is not the case. But on coin, it's more likely to be the case. Off coin, it's a pretty different game, at least for the mid game. So I'll get into the matchups now, and I'll start with Token Druid. This matchup shouldn't be difficult. I've played it many times now, and it really seems like the Token Druid struggles. You don't have great removal for the Token Druid boards, but that's not usually a big deal, since cards like Sea Giant, Rabble Bouncer, and both the spell and giant combo are just really strong versus Druid. Token Druid also doesn't really have good removal. They have Wrath Swipe, but it's not really good removal for giants, at least. So a lot of the time you can protect your minions to set up these big turns like a Conjurer's Calling. So for example, you play Mountain Giant and Mirror Image or Ray of Frost. Druid will probably have a really hard time dealing with the Mountain Giant, but usually win with Rabble Bouncer, Sea Giant combo as well. That one's a lot easier to pull off. You just wait till they make a board and then play those cards. Sometimes you'll Ray of Frost or Mirror Image, so you usually will never die. Random spells can also be good versus token deck. So you have tons of AoE, right? Like Flame Strike, Blizzard, Frost Nova, and those are pretty game-winning. Arcane Explosion. So lots of random spells, same with magic trick spells. The mulligan would be Sork's Apprentice, Cyclone, Rabble Bouncer, Arcane Intellect, Luna, Sea Giant. Tempo or Aggro Rogue. This matchup is really close since Rogue is just such a powerful deck right now. And like most of our matchups, it's all about getting the combos. Rogue can't deal with the combos, the giant combos that well, and the spell combo is also very strong. A typical Rogue game will usually look something like this. Turn 1 to 3, just regular old pass AI Luna. Usually there's not much else to do. Sometimes ping on a 2-1 deckhand. And then turn 4 to 6 is just ooze the pick if you have it, Sandbinder, or do the Cyclone combo. Ideally you do the Cyclone combo on turn 4 or 5 in this matchup and then just start using the spells after, but that's not so common to do the early Cyclone combos. Sometimes turn 4 Giants can also be strong versus Rogue, because if you sap a turn 4 Giant, if you have the coin you can just Giant Coin Conjures Calling, but they really need to develop if they're sapping an early Giant, or else it just doesn't really do that much. But yeah, if you get more than 3 spells, that's usually pretty good against Rogue. I'd say 4 more. But yeah, if you're still alive by turn 7, you're probably ahead on board at this point, and you should probably be trying to counter the Rogue Burst with taunts, well, unless you're really high HP, so this is when maybe cycling cards starts to come in handy to find your other mirror images or Ziliacs, all those good cards to sort of close out the game. Mech Hunter, this matchup feels close, but it can be tough sometimes because cards like Spider Bomb and Venomizer are very powerful. We have cards like Sea Giant, Bouncer to help us swing the board back, and also Ray of Frost is amazing against magnetic minions and to maybe slow those spider bombs down, and Mirror Image can also be good to make them sort of miss on the giants and hit the 0-2 sometimes. Here's an example of beating Hunter with almost only Sea Giant, Ray of Frost, and Conjurer's Calling. And then Ziliacs can also be game-changing versus Hunter. Hunter usually doesn't have a strong removal, so you can get a lot of heal, especially if you make a big mech from the Sea Giant Conjurer's Calling, but that doesn't happen too often. Zoo Warlock. So, not much to say about this matchup. It should be pretty easy if you play similar to how you would versus Token Druid, so removing minions is pretty important, but I don't think it's as important. It's close though, because Zoo has Grim Rally, but they don't have bursts like Savage Roar and as many buffs. And Zoo doesn't really have strong removal, especially when so many lists don't run Soulfire, so it's pretty hard to get rushed down. And then if you can protect a minion like Sork's Apprentice, you'll probably out-tempo them, and Rabble Bouncers are just very strong early game, if you can get those down. And then Murloc Shaman, I decided to include it just briefly. Similar to Token Druid Zoolock, just watch out for Poison Murloc Bloodlust. I haven't played that one very often, but it seems like a Giant Cyclone Mage does pretty well against these token style decks. So Dragon Conjurer Mage. This is a deck that I really enjoy, so I know the matchup pretty well. And it's all about the Giants. This isn't my favorite matchup though, but they're my favorite decks. So our deck has spells like Ray of Frost, which can help a lot, but the Dragon Mage has strong cards for the matchup, like Book of Specters for earlier Giants, and MC Tech to steal our threats after our Conj Calling turns, and then Voodoo Doll to hard remove the Giant, which makes you have to really be careful when playing that turn 4 Giant into their turn 5 Voodoo Doll. But yeah, this matchup is pretty volatile since it's really, like, neither player can really deal with Giants, so whoever gets them down first is probably going to be ahead, but there's been a fair amount of games where the first Giant doesn't win, because you can sometimes counter these turns with, like, Sea Giant, and Sea Giant can sometimes be stronger than the Mountain Giants in this matchup, since you can make, with Conjurer's Calling on a Sea Giant, you can make 10-10s, 12-12s, and 8-8 rushes, which can be super helpful. But yeah, like, if you run MC Tech, that's a good tech for the Mage Mirror. Rabble Bouncer sometimes helps if they play into it. And then here's a common scenario that I thought I would include that happens against Mage. So if you make a 7-8 Grave Horror on your side of the board off of a Conj Calling, and then they have an 8-8 Giant on their side of the board, it can be really important to put the Giant at 7 or less HP, so they can't just trade the Giant and then conjures a 1 HP Giant. This basically will protect a whole 7-8, and it actually happens quite a lot. So if you can hit in a 2-2 or a 3-2 or ping to put it down to below 8 health, then do that if you can. Giant Cyclone Mirror. This one is similar to the other Mage matchup, but a little bit harder to play. If you go first, it's tough to get the first Giant Conjurer's Calling, so I usually have to go with a more tempo line. So sometimes I'll just play early minions like Sork's Apprentice to try to get them to slow their Giant turns down. Also, Luna can be very strong for this. Ooze is alright as well, but these minions can actually kill the enemy Giant if they played on turn 4, so they can also be very helpful for that as well. But sometimes it's unavoidable to beat early Giant against Coin, so some games you'll just lose to that. Then here's a big matchup, Control Warrior. I'm pretty comfortable with calling this matchup Mage favorite, not by a lot, but at least by maybe 5-10%, although my stats say a bit higher than that. And then this one is all about the greed, so the giant combos, and Archmage Antonidas really gets to shine here as well, and he's the main reason why he's included in the deck is because he can increase your matchup by 20+%, which is a lot. The mana Cyclone combo isn't as effective against Warrior since random spells won't really win you the game the same way it does against an aggro or mid-range deck. Mostly because area of effect cards and removal aren't as good versus Warrior as they are versus other decks. So try to keep your hand size large in the early mid-game to get the giant combo as soon as you can, but this isn't always the case. Sometimes you just won't have giant or Conjurer's Calling in your hand, and it makes sense to play more for tempo. Playing around removal like Shield Slam, Dynomatic, and Brawl is extremely important, so get used to trying to think about those cards. So if you have giants on board, you don't need to play minions for no reason if you don't need to. So if you don't play 0/2 mirror images. If you can avoid playing the Apprentice or the 2/2s or the Ooze, do that. Mostly because Brawl, you really only need 2 giants in the early mid game. They can't really Dynomatic 2 giants unless they have board. But sometimes you can play into the Brawl and make 3 or 4 giants so that you increase your odds of a giant winning the Brawl, and then sometimes you're in a position where if a giant wins a Brawl, you'll have like the twin spell from Conj Calling left over, or a second Conj Calling isn't unlikely. And then you just make more giants, and they're down a Brawl, and it's very unlikely that they're gonna be able to deal with the next giants. And then later on in the game, when the warrior is at 10 mana, sometimes you have to go wider on the board and play more threats than normal to try and play around Omega Devastator, so sometimes you have to play a little bit into Brawl. Archmage Antonidas plus Sorcerer's Apprentice and cheap spells is a great way to finish up the game if the warrior was able to deal with your giants. This combo can easily generate 5 or more fireballs, so if you do have Antonidas in your hand, try to save as many spells as you can. Apprentice can also be saved for this combo if possible. But don't focus too much on this Antonidas turn. Sometimes you can't make it work, you won't have the draws, and you can't afford to wait for the draws, so sometimes you'll just have to play the Anton for maybe 1 or 2 fireballs, and this is a lot better when you expect for it to be hard for your opponent to remove, since they probably had to use most of the removal on the Mountain Giants and the Sea Giants. And then Bomb Warrior, it's very similar to Control Warrior, but with less removal and more threats. I prefer the matchup for that reason, and they don't usually have enough pressure to kill you with bombs. They usually just have to remove your board like Control Warrior. And then Blastmaster Boom can kind of easily be countered by Rattledancer Sea Giant and maybe Ray of Frost on the 7/7, and that often makes them have to brawl their own board off, which isn't so great for the Bomb Warrior. That's it for matchups. So card analysis and budget replacement. In this section, I'll talk about some of the non-core card choices and suggest some budget replacements or tech alternatives. If I don't mention a card in this section, it means it's irreplaceable and core to the deck. So for this reason, I'll be skipping over every single spell since they're all really important to the deck, but don't worry, they're all pretty cheap, I think, for the most part, to craft if you don't have them. This deck does have a lot of room to change cards around, so I'll talk about the ones that you can replace. Here's a list of some cards that aren't included in the deck that could fit if you need to replace anything. So Acolyte of Pain, Banana Buffoon ×2, Mind Control Tech, Vex Crow, Frostbolt, or Questing Adventure if you want to go a bit greedy. So Acidic Swampers is just a response to all the rogues on ladder since it can be game winning. You can replace it with any of the suggested cards. Khadgar. So you can play the deck without Khadgar if you don't have him, but if you do have him and you enjoy Mage in general, I would recommend crafting him. You can set up very powerful turns, obviously, with Conjurer's Calling, and even things like Mirror Image Sea Giant. I find that Khadgar will often set up those Sea Giant turns. And you can replace Khadgar with any of the suggested replacements. Stargazer Luna. Luna is one of my favorite mage cards since she can make for some really strong card draw turns, often combined with Sork's Apprentice to make 0 mana spells. You can replace her though, since you do have a lot of late game minions as well, late game cards. You can replace her with any of the suggested replacement cards. Sandbinder, so I just started playing this card not too long ago, but I already really like it in the deck. I talked about it a bit earlier and how nice it is when you're going first. So yeah, guaranteeing the draw can be very helpful. Sometimes you draw the wrong one, but usually they're both pretty nice to have in your hand. The only downside is a 4-mana 2/4 is kind of bad, but at the same time we have nothing else really better to do on turn 4 most of the time. And you can replace this with any of the suggested replacement cards, but you might want to look for more card draw or value. And then Ziliax, as you might know, Ziliax is a great card in most decks right now. This is kind of a mid-rangey deck, and Ziliax just wins games. It's your only really good heal card. It can be great to magnetize onto a Conjurer's Calling minion. 10 drops have 3 different mechs, so you can look out for those big Ziliax magnetics on the 10-drop mechs. But you can replace them with one of the suggested replacement cards if you don't have them, but I would recommend maybe saving up some dust for this one. So, Archmage Antonidas, this one's a little bit controversial since you'll see a couple other mage players not running it. I strongly disagree with this. I don't see a reason not to run Antonidas. I think it's just good. There's enough warriors to warrant it. There's no better card versus warrior in the whole deck, basically. It's not the best versus aggro, so if you're in a really, really heavy aggro meta, you can consider cutting it for maybe questing adventure. But I think it's just too powerful against decks like Warrior, Mage, Conjure Mage Mirrors, and Nomi Priest, or any just sort of control-y slow deck will make it worth it if you do play those matchups. It can still sometimes win though versus anything. Like, I take wins off of Rogue all the time with Anton. It's actually great versus the slower hunters as well, like Midrange and Secret Hunter. And sometimes they just run out of removal after using it all on the Giants. And yeah, it's just really good with twin spells, Ray of Frost, Mirror Image, and Evocation, also Magic Trick. So it just makes a bit too much sense for me. You can replace Anton with Vex Crow or Questing Adventurer. Sea Giant. So I actually didn't like this card for a long time, mostly because I found it a bit awkward versus Rogue, which it still kind of is, but people play into it a lot, and it can be really good with like Mirror Image, Elemental Evocation plus Mana Cyclone is a free minion. Khadgar can make a lot of board, and it really though works best off of your opponent boards. There's a lot of decks right now that do go wide on the board, even Rogue does. Against Warrior, it's sort of just a late game card. You're probably going to have to play it for minimum 6 or probably 5 or 6 mana minimum. Sometimes it'll even be 8 or 9 when you just have nothing else to do. But that extra value can still be very useful against Warrior, even though it's not that efficient. But it's great versus decks like Token Druid, Zoo, Mech Hunter, of course. It's also very good in the mirrors too, since both players run cards like Mirror Image and tend to go wider on the board. It isn't core to the deck, but it can be replaced with other value cards. Mountain Giant, however, is core to the deck, and I would not recommend cutting this one. But you can play different mage builds without the Giant. Conjurer's Calling, more tempo mage style. Alright, well that's all I have for now, and thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this guide will help you a bit on ladder, but remember, you will still learn more from playing games with the deck than reading a guide. But I will be streaming the deck a lot, so check it out on my stream, or even my stream VODs for my replays. And most of my future videos here probably won't be guides, but will be more clips and highlights from my stream, so that sort of thing. So subscribe if you're interested in that, and I probably won't be responding to many YouTube comments, so if you have questions, ask me on Twitter or Twitch chat. Thanks for watching, bye.